Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. Since so many of you wanted to know how we converted our van, I'm going to show you the entire process of how we built it and basically how we turned this into this. However, if you want to see the full video of how the finished van turned out, please check out our van tour video. In it we will show you the entire van, the setup, all the functions, and how it all looks and works today. Oh, actually guys, just a quick heads up here before we begin. So, when we were filming this, we didn't really plan on making a full YouTube video out of it at all. We literally just recorded like bits and pieces. And we also spoke Swedish throughout almost the entire build. But I mean, since you guys probably don't even understand the glorious language of the most noble of heroes, I've decided that for this video, it's basically just gonna be me sitting here with my beer, and I'm gonna do an English voiceover for you guys. Yay! How exciting! Alright. Anyways, it's gonna be pretty fast-paced, and I will be the first one to admit that a few bits and pieces of the building process might be missing every now and then.
It's a remarkable Swedish tradition.
Wait, where's the hardware? There should be a hardware box.
IKEA.
Anyways, I want to begin by saying that making any kind of project like this involves a lot of planning. So, the first step is to do a budget, just to get a rough estimate of how much you can spend on the conversion. Next up is to create a blueprint with all the measurements, and of course this ensures that you can fit everything you want into your van. However, here's a personal tip. Once you have everything sketched out on paper, use folded blankets, sheets or even towels, and you can lay it all out in real life. I mean, it makes it so much easier to visualize the space and to realize just how limited it actually is. Lastly, you will definitely need an electrical map. The one I made for our van looked like this, and it's great to have a real estimate of how much power each appliance will draw and where all the wires should go. I mean, in this way, you won't have to figure everything out as you go. Anyways, now that you've planned everything, it's time to take action. This is where you pretend to know the difference between a horsepower and a horseshoe. Ultimately, you will just settle for the van that seems least likely to break down on the middle of the highway. Then it's time to rip out the rubber mats on the floor and the grey fabric-covered ceiling thing. Next up is insulation. We literally covered the entire interior with thermal insulation sheets. That's the shiny stuff you can see here. We initially planned on using fiberglass insulation too, but considering it's always extremely hot here in Australia, we didn't think that we would need any extra insulation. Once the van was insulated, we started setting up the solar system. Not that one. Since we were building the entire van off-grid, this was crucial to get done as soon as possible. We decided to go with two 210 watt solar panels, two 200 amp batteries, a 3000 watts inverter, and a control box that also holds a DCDC charger. So initially we just connected everything out on the floor in the back of the van. It's not overly complicated, but if you have no idea what you're doing, I would recommend asking someone who does. Unless you enjoy the thrill of accidental electrocution. Finally, we mounted the solar panels to the roof. With the electrical system up and running, we started to mark out and cut out the particle boards for our subfloor. And we needed a total of 3 pieces in order to cover the floor, and we just glued them down with some construction adhesive. Next up is the dividing wall that separates the driver cabin from the living area. It took a little while and was a bit tricky due to all the weird curvatures and angles of the van, but eventually we managed to map out exactly where we wanted the window to be. And I just want to point out that since we were going to use a window molding here, we didn't care too much about making the cut perfectly straight. No one's gonna see this cut anyway. We knew that we wanted to paint everything later on, but for this wall particularly, it was easiest to just prime the side facing towards the driving area straight away before putting it up. Once the dividing wall was up, we mounted these aluminum bars. Since we wanted to keep the curvature of the ceiling, the idea was to use these bendable bars as battens for our ceiling. We're planning on just drilling through the ceiling planks and mounting them directly to these bars with metal screws. As you can see, we also spray painted the entire ceiling black. This was because we wanted a slight gap between the ceiling planks, and we didn't want any of that shiny insulation to show through those gaps. Unfortunately, we don't have any videos of that, because Cindy was busy filming lizards. At this point, we also cut a hole in the roof and installed a ceiling fan. Unfortunately, we don't have any videos of that either, because Cindy was now busy filming birds.
Det är en jätterolig fågel här borta. Ser du den?
The next step was to put up battens on the dividing wall. We anchored them to the subfloor with some angle brackets and then started to installing the first cladding on that wall. Since our kitchen is going to cover the bottom of the wall anyway, there were no need to clad it all the way down at this point. Instead, I started to put up these thinner white battens on the other walls. I used the thinner ones because they are thin enough to bend so that they could follow the van's natural curvature without snapping, but they are still thick enough to attach the cladding to. And here's how it turned out. Alright, so with battens on all the walls and in the ceiling, it was time to start the actual ceiling. After some thought, we decided to save a few bucks by using the same planks for the ceiling that we were going to use for the cladding of the walls. So what I did was to basically cut off this part, which is called
tongue,
and this part, which is called
groove,
and then split the entire thing one more time in the middle. So from each wall plank, we now got 2 planks for the ceiling. Anyways, this is what I ended up with. You might call it a bunch of useless sticks, but in fact I know that it's a bunch of
tongue
and
groove,
plus a pile of nicely cut timber for our ceiling. After what felt like an eternity of sanding, we could finally start installing them on the ceiling. And here, I will just advise you to remember to run all the necessary wires you need before finishing the ceiling. It's so easy to forget, and it's such a nerve-wracking hassle to try to pull them through that tiny gap and actually get them all the way from one side of the van to the other, between the finished ceiling and the roof of the van. After a quick test to make sure that the spotlights worked as they should, we continued putting up the rest of the ceiling planks. Unfortunately, we don't have any videos of that, because Cindy was busy filming.
Han går bara runt och piper, stackaren.
More birds. With the ceiling finished, we could start working on the frame for the sofa. Let's pause for a little while. We used construction adhesive and angle brackets to once again anchor the frame to the subfloor. This process of course involved a lot of measuring and cutting and counting, but I mean it's not super interesting to either film or watch. Anyways, as you can see here as well, we have now also boxed in and covered the wheel wells. But unfortunately we don't have any videos of that, because
Han har fått också sällskap av en kakadura.
a couple of days later we had installed the first dividing walls and shelves in the sofa. And me if it was a relief to finally get all of that electrical equipment out of the way, away from the floor and into its designated place. As you can see, we put the batteries at the bottom of the sofa and the inverter and control box on the top shelf. Now we could also finally do some cable management and get those out of the way. From this point, the van in general just started to look so much cleaner and more organized. Also, at this stage, all the electrical wires had been run to where they were supposed to be. Since we wanted all the power switches on one side, next to the door, while the electrical system is on the opposite side, there were a bunch of cables going back and forth, and I highly recommend marking everything because, trust me, it's a lot to remember. Oh, and by the way, all these gaps and cracks that you can see everywhere are so easy to fix with a caulking gun and some sealant. Lots of it. At this point we also made a small box, which would be the cabinet for our shower at the back. And another small box behind the water container where we were going to place the water pump for the shower. Okay, new day. Now we're cladding the sofa. Cladding is my favorite part because it's actually quite fun and you can see the progress so rapidly. But if cladding is the fun part, then doors are the exact opposite. They take forever to make. And oh, okay, now we have doors. And lids that you can open. Great. And when it comes to the doors, this didn't at all take an entire week to measure correctly and line up so that they would open properly. Next up is framing the kitchen. And this is a very limited space. And I had to make room for the stove, fridge, water containers, sink, storage, faucet, and the freaking toilet. But besides from all that, the process is very similar to the sofa. So basically frame first, then the sides, dividing walls, and finally the shelves. At this stage, since we were going to integrate it, we also put in our fridge. We went with a 50-liter 12-volt model from King's. And since this is a kitchen, we need doors. We decided to go with a simple shaker door design, which basically is just a frame with a backplate. They look beautiful, and as I've already told you, I love to make doors. It is so easy. They just line up instantly when installed, the hinges just magically pops on, and nothing ever goes. Alright, so I made it. Great. We have the fridge behind this door, some storage area behind this little weird door here, and the toilet just slides out from underneath here. And don't mind these gaps and these dents and marks over here. With some sealant, wood filler and sanding, they will be as good as new. This is where you can truly start to see the transformation from an empty van into a nice little cabin. Oh, and while cladding the walls, it's so important to remember to make all the necessary holes for all your switches and power outlets. And this is the result, and that's me. Super happy, rambling on about how nice it is to finally have real walls and the correct wires running through the correct holes in the walls. Let me just pause here for a second. We used a ton of lightweight filler here to cover this gap between the cladded wall and the car's natural or original metal wall. It's actually holding up really well, and I think that it created a beautiful natural transition between the two walls. Alright, let's move on. Oh yeah, we also decided to install some cozy light strings in the ceiling. So this is the connection for that, and here you can see the light strings. They're super cheap and I just glued them on to a combination of two wooden moldings I had. So yeah, this is going to go up against the wall here, one on each side, and it will also cover the transition from wall to ceiling. And here you can see how it all turned out. While we were working on cladding the walls, we were wondering what to do with this protruding metal part of the sliding door mechanism. After some thinking, we decided to turn it into a small spice rack. Cindy also took the opportunity to leave a little piece of us forever sealed in this van. And after I had nailed it all together and sealed it up, this is the finished result. Alright, let's pause for a little while. Do you notice how we kept the tint here? That is the plastic film on the inside of all the windows. Since we made the windows smaller with the cladding, we mask taped a smaller, perfectly rectangular window that matches our new window form, that is the hole in the cladding, onto this tinted film and spray painted everything of the old window except for this new rectangle with black spray paint from the inside. By doing this, we get a square, a rectangular window of see-through visibility, even from the outside, but we are also at the same time blacking out the rest of the original window. Once the windows are completely done, we can use a razor blade or a sharp box knife to cut around the angles of the new window and just peel off this tint. Alright, let's move on. Here I'm talking about how we need to build a frame for the windows, and again, I'm sure all you real tradies out there are cringing right now with your fancy machines and cool laser tools, but what I did, and honestly this worked perfectly fine, was I took this piece of wood, drilled a hole in it, put a pencil through it, and I then put it up against the cardboard, just like this. And I just let it slide against the angle I wanted to measure. I then transferred it onto the wood, cut it out, and there you got it. I mean, it's almost perfect, nothing a little sanding can't fix. After that, I just repeated the process on the other sides, nailed and glued it all together into a frame that I could just slide into the hole in the wall. And there's our window. Great, now I just need to make 4 more of these things. Anyways, once they were all done, I put moldings on the edges for aesthetic reasons, and I then filled all the gaps with wood filler. For the largest gaps, I started out with a lightweight filler, and I then did coats of fine wood filler. And this is a process, so it's going to take some time. Then I did exactly the same thing with the sliding door. So basically battens, then cladding, then the window. Although here I needed to make sure that there was enough room for the window to be able to open properly and slide through. Alright, time for the electrical installation. And as you can see, it is a giant mess. But since I marked all the cable with the little blue tapes, it's an organized mess. And if you haven't done this before, or if you have no idea what you're doing, call someone who does. Because earlier, when we installed the solar panels and the batteries and the inverter, we were just playing around with 12 volts. But now we're actually dealing with 220 to 240 volts, depending on where you are in the world. And that is enough to like unalive you instantly. However, since I'm not afraid of anything, especially not something as inevitable as death, I went ahead and installed a dimmable light switch for the spotlights in the ceiling anyway, and I then connected the two power outlets at the back, one on each side, and I also connected the LED lights to the second switch by the door. And I finally connected our ceiling fan to the last switch. Oh, and by the way, the wire here is going to our wall fan, or the Sirocco fan. Oh, we also have a power outlet here now, in the kitchen. With all that in place, it was time to take care of this mess, and some strips and cable holders really cleaned up this area. Speaking of electricity, when we bought the van, it only had this old, weird, radio unit. So, naturally, I ripped that one out and installed this nice touchscreen off-the-market unit. This one has Google Maps, Spotify, YouTube, and you can connect your phone to it, yada yada, you get the point. However, it was so hard to get the thing to actually play any audio. It was completely silent, no matter what the I did, and it almost drove me like crazy. I was digging around all these cables here, trying to figure out why it wasn't working, and eventually, as a last resort, I decided to pick apart the entire door, and lo and behold, there's no speaker. Of course there is no speaker. Why would there be a speaker? So yeah, we bought some new speakers. And we also found this super cute reverse camera. We then basically have to just do what you've already seen in terms of attaching battens, cladding, framing the window and so forth, but for the baklucka this time. I don't care what the English word is for this one. I will just say baklucka. I don't know it, I don't want to know it, I don't care. Finally, it is time for the bench top. We wanted something nice and wooden that reminded us of Scandinavia. So we decided to go with this bleached wooden bench top. Once we had made sure that we had measured everything correctly, we attached the hatch and drilled holes for the handle. Since the bench top is L-shaped, we needed two parts. So we cut a hole for the sink in the second part, lined it up, and made sure that it all came together nicely before we glued and screwed it all into place. After the bench top was installed, we needed running water for the faucet. So we installed a 12-volt water pump underneath the bench top and connected it to these two water containers you can see here. But unfortunately, we don't have any videos of this, because time for tiling. So we wanted some nice white little tiles to run along the kitchen wall here, forming a cute little backsplash. For some reason, Cindy was super amazed by the diamond blade on the angle cutter.
Rocks don't lose their shape. Diamonds are a girl's best friend.
After that, we basically just tiled some more. And to be honest, this was the first time I've ever tiled anything. And both Cindy and I figured everything out as we went along. But as with the rest of the van, the tiling actually turned out quite nice, if I can say so myself. Then Cindy wanted a small bin out here, so I made one. And after that, it was time for sanding. And let me tell you this, as a former professional painter, when it comes to sanding, it takes so much time, I know, and it is awful, but it is one of the most important steps, and it is worth it, so just do it properly and let it take its time. Then we looked at various color choices for our van. Eventually, we decided to go with herb planter, because
Herb is a plant. I mean, herbs are good for everything.
It was a beautiful color, and since we wanted the walls to be in classical white color, it made a good contrast with some nice green tones on those furniture. So, herb planter it is.
Herb.
After a quick stop at Bunnings to buy the necessary paint, primers, brushes and so forth, we started to prime everything. So everything needed 1 coat of primer, since it was bare wood, and then at least 2 coats of paint. For the ceiling we decided to go with a white tinted varnish from Feast & Watson, and this is one of those varnishes where you can just put on as many coats as you want, and it gets more white tinted the further you go. We decided that 2 coats were enough, and that this was the look that we were going for. And to be honest, I think this turned out so beautiful. We also of course varnished all the windows, but as you know by now...
Det ser ut som något, du vet, Kalle Anka.
When all the varnishing of the ceiling and windows was done, it looked like this. So finally it was time to actually start painting. We painted everything with a minimum of 2 coats. However, most of the van, especially the green furnitures, needed like 3 or even 4 coats on some surfaces. And of course, when painting sharp edges like these here, it is inevitable that the paint will bleed through the tape every now and then. But here is the trick. First, always remove the tape while the paint is still wet, let it dry, and then use a utility knife or a cardboard knife, like I'm doing here, to gently cut away those blobs and bleed-throughs. And the result will look something like this. Just a beautiful razor-sharp edge all the way down. Once that was done and the paint has dried, we drilled holes in the bench top for the faucet, and we installed both the sink and the faucet, and we also now varnished the bench top. But this time we used a food-safe protective coat for the bench top. Now we also installed the stove. We chose to go with a single burner stovetop from Safari. It's a remarkable induction cooktop and I would definitely recommend it. Especially if your girlfriend thinks that gas stoves are going to spontaneously combust and self-ignite and kill us all when we're asleep, and that they are basically weapons of mass destruction. Next up, we varnished this tabletop and this little extension piece. And if you don't understand the purpose of this little extension piece, just watch the full-length van tour video and it will all make sense. And here you can see what the finished van will pretty much look like. I mean, at this point, all we have left to do is the floor, fabric for the cushions, and some final touch-ups here and there. Oh yeah, and of course, the Sirocco fan. Again, Australia is extremely hot. In terms of flooring, we choose to go with a light wood color that matched the ceiling and the bench tops. It's a scratch-resistant hybrid wood floor that we just glued down to the subfloor with some floor adhesive. Moving on to some final aesthetics. We wanted some patterned tiles on our doorstep. And to be honest, I have no idea why Cindy looks like we are running some kind of illegal meth lab. But again, I don't ask any questions, I'm just here to cut the tiles. So I cut the tiles, we fitted them, and it turned out beautiful. Last but not least, Cindy took on the enormous project of making all the curtains. She also stitched together all the covers for the cushions and the backrests, which added a very personal touch to every part of the van's interior. Anyways, there you have it guys, this is how the van turned out. And if you want to see more of it, please have a look at our full van tour video. And yeah, I don't know. Hit that subscribe button, like the video, make a comment, I don't know. If you have any questions or want to know anything more that you think I missed, write a comment below. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching. Cheers.